Imagine your worst enemy winning, not just defeating you in battle, not just taking your throne, but erasing you completely. Every statue of you, smashed. Every inscription of your name, chiseled away. Every temple you built, rededicated to someone else, as if you never existed. This wasn't just vandalism. This was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. In ancient Egypt, it was worse than death. Because if your name was forgotten, your soul died forever. And it happened to one of Egypt's most powerful rulers, a pharaoh who changed everything, who challenged the gods themselves, who ruled for 17 years, and was then systematically deleted from history. Welcome back to Pharaoh's legacy. Today, we're uncovering one of ancient Egypt's greatest mysteries and greatest cover-ups. The year is 1887. A local Egyptian woman is digging for sebak, ancient mud brick that farmers use as fertilizer, near the village of Tel El Amarna, about 190 miles south of Cairo. She hits something hard. Not brick, tablets, hundreds of them, covered in strange wedge-shaped writing. These weren't hieroglyphs. This was cuneiform, the writing system of Mesopotamia over 1,000 miles away. What were Mesopotamian tablets doing in the middle of Egypt? These were letters, diplomatic correspondence, from kings and princes across the ancient world, all addressed to someone called Neferuria, the Pharaoh of Egypt. But here's the problem. Nobody had ever heard of a pharaoh called Neferuria. Egyptian king lists didn't mention him. Temple walls didn't show him. It was as if this person had been deliberately removed from the historical record. As archaeologists began excavating Tel El Amarna more thoroughly, a disturbing pattern emerged. Everywhere they looked, they found evidence of systematic destruction. Cartouches, the oval frames that contained royal names, had been carefully chiseled out. Faces on statues had been obliterated. Entire walls had been demolished. But this wasn't random vandalism. This was surgical, precise. Someone had gone through every temple, every monument, every inscription, and methodically removed one specific person from Egypt's memory. The Amarna letters gave archaeologists their first clue about who this erased pharaoh might be. The tablets mentioned religious upheaval, a new capital city, and a dramatic break with tradition. They were looking for a revolutionary, a heretic, a pharaoh who had committed the unforgivable sin in ancient Egypt. He had challenged the gods. His name was Akhenaten, and once you know what to look for, the evidence of his erasure is everywhere. At Karnak, his name was chiseled out and replaced with the enemy or the criminal. At Thebes, his temples were dismantled and the blocks were used as fill inside other buildings, literally burying his legacy. Even his own son would come to deny him. King Tutankhamun, yes, that King Tut, would later erect a stela describing the chaos of his father's reign, though he carefully avoided mentioning Akhenaten by name. But here's what makes this story fascinating. Akhenaten wasn't erased because he was a weak pharaoh. He wasn't erased because he lost battles or bankrupted the kingdom. He was erased because he tried to change everything. And in ancient Egypt, that was unforgivable. So who was Akhenaten? What did he do that was so terrible that his own people wanted to forget he ever existed? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning, to understand who Akhenaten was before he became a heretic. Egypt in the 14th century BCE was at the height of its power. This was the 18th dynasty, the New Kingdom, when Egypt was the superpower of the ancient world. Egyptian armies had conquered lands from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. Tribute flowed in from vassal states. Gold poured from Nubian mines. The pharaohs of Egypt were the richest, most powerful rulers on earth. And behind this power stood an institution just as mighty as the pharaoh himself, the priesthood of Amun. The temple of Amun at Karnak wasn't just a religious center. It was an economic powerhouse. The priests controlled vast estates, commanded enormous wealth, and wielded political influence that rivaled the pharaoh's own. Some estimates suggest that by the end of the 18th dynasty, the priesthood of Amun controlled nearly 1/3 of Egypt's cultivable land and employed hundreds of thousands of people. In other words, the priests were almost as powerful as the king himself, and every pharaoh knew it. Into this world was born a prince named Amenhotep, Amenhotep IV. He was the younger son of Amenhotep III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, and Queen Tiye, one of history's most influential royal women. But Amenhotep IV was not supposed to be pharaoh. He had an older brother, Crown Prince Thutmose, who was being groomed for the throne. Thutmose appears in numerous inscriptions early in Amenhotep III's reign. He held important priestly titles. He was clearly the heir. And then, he vanished from the record. We don't know what happened to Thutmose. Disease, accident, murder. The ancient sources are silent. But his death changed everything. Suddenly, the younger brother, a prince who may have been trained as a priest, not a warrior, was thrust into the succession. From the very beginning, Amenhotep IV was different. Look at his statues. Even the early ones, made when he was still following tradition, show something unusual. Where other pharaohs are depicted as perfect physical specimens, broad-shouldered, athletic, idealized, Amenhotep IV appears elongated. His face is long and narrow, his hips are wide, his belly protrudes. For over a century, scholars have debated what this means. Does it show a real medical condition? Marfan syndrome? Froelich's syndrome? Some scholars have suggested so. Or was this the beginning of something else? A new artistic style that emphasized truth over idealization. Because here's what we know for certain. Amenhotep IV didn't just look different. He thought differently. Even before he became pharaoh, there are hints that young Amenhotep was drawn to a relatively minor solar deity named Aten, the sun disk itself. Aten wasn't new. The god had been worshipped for centuries as one aspect of the sun god Ra. But Aten had always been a minor player in Egypt's crowded pantheon. Amenhotep IV was about to change that, dramatically. Around 1353 BCE, Amenhotep III died, and his unusual younger son ascended to the throne of Egypt as Amenhotep IV. He would rule for 17 years, and in that time, he would tear Egyptian civilization apart. For the first few years, Amenhotep IV seemed like a normal pharaoh. He built temples. He performed the traditional rituals. He honored the gods, especially Amun, whose name was even part of his own. But quietly, he was also building something else. Just east of the massive Temple of Amun at Karnak, Amenhotep IV constructed a series of new temples. But these temples were different. They weren't built for Amun. They were built for Aten, the sun disk. The Gempatan, the sun disk is found, was unlike any Egyptian temple before it. Instead of being dark and enclosed, with the Holy of Holies hidden from view, this temple was open to the sky. Why? Because Aten was the sun itself. The god was visible to everyone, every day. There was no need for mystery or hidden sanctuaries. And here's where things get revolutionary. In these temples, Amenhotep IV changed how the divine was depicted. The art in these temples shocked Egypt. The pharaoh and his family were shown in startlingly realistic, almost grotesque detail. The traditional idealized forms were abandoned. Amenhotep IV's elongated face, prominent belly, and wide hips were exaggerated even further. His wife Nefertiti was shown with an almost impossibly long neck. Their daughters appeared with oddly shaped, elongated skulls. This wasn't just a new art style. This was a statement. We are showing the truth. The real, not the ideal. And then, in the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV did something unprecedented. He changed his name. Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, became Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, or spirit of the Aten. Do you understand what this meant? In ancient Egypt, names had power. Your name was part of your soul. The pharaoh's name connected him to the gods, to Ma'at, cosmic order itself. By removing Amun's name from his own identity, Akhenaten was making a declaration. Amun was no longer his god. But he didn't stop there. Akhenaten ordered temples throughout Egypt to stop making offerings to the traditional gods. He redirected their revenue to Aten. He declared that Aten was not just the supreme god. Aten was the only god. Some Egyptologists believe this makes Akhenaten the first monotheist in history, predating Hebrew monotheism by decades, if not centuries. Others argue it wasn't true monotheism, but rather monolatry, the worship of one god while acknowledging others exist. But to the people of Egypt, these theological distinctions didn't matter. What mattered was this: their gods, the gods their ancestors had worshipped for 3,000 years, were being abandoned. And then Akhenaten announced something even more radical. He was abandoning Thebes, Egypt's capital for centuries, the home of Amun's great temple, and building a completely new city. A city that had never been tainted by the worship of false gods. In year 5 of his reign, Akhenaten traveled to a barren stretch of land in Middle Egypt. On a crescent-shaped plain, hemmed in by cliffs, he declared, "I shall make Akhenaten for the Aten, my father, in this place. I shall not make Akhenaten south of it, north of it, west of it, or east of it. It was the Aten, my father, who revealed it to me." The city's name, Akhenaten, Horizon of the Aten. We know it today as Amarna. Over the next few years, an entire city rose from the desert. The great temple of the Aten, enormous, open to the sky, stretching over 800 meters long. The royal palace, decorated with revolutionary art, showing the royal family in intimate, loving poses. This art was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. Akhenaten and Nefertiti kissing, the royal couple holding hands, their daughters sitting on their laps, playing with jewelry. For the first time in Egyptian art, the royal family appeared human, loving, real. Akhenaten wasn't just for the elite. Entire communities were transplanted. Workers, artisans, soldiers, bureaucrats. Tens of thousands of people were ordered to leave their ancestral homes and move to this new city in the middle of nowhere. And here's the crucial detail. Akhenaten decreed that he, Nefertiti, and their daughters would be buried at Akhenaten, not in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes, where every pharaoh for centuries had been laid to rest. This wasn't just a new city. This was meant to be Egypt's future, forever. But there was a problem, a big problem. The rest of Egypt didn't want this future. Here's something fascinating that archaeology has revealed about Akhenaten's revolution. The common people never really accepted it. Excavations at Amarna, Akhenaten's own capital, have uncovered something revealing. In the houses of ordinary workers, archaeologists found hidden amulets of the old gods. Bes, the dwarf god who protected children. Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess who watched over pregnant women. The old household gods that Egyptians had relied on for generations. Think about what this means. Even in Akhenaten's own city, built specifically for Aten worship, the people secretly clung to their traditional gods. Why? Because the Aten was distant, cosmic. The sun disk didn't care if your child had a fever or your wife was in difficult labor. The sun didn't protect your home from scorpions or bring you a good harvest. The old gods did. They were personal, accessible. You could pray to them, make offerings, ask for help with everyday problems. Akhenaten's god was abstract and philosophical. Beautiful in theory, perhaps. But for a farmer worried about the Nile flood, or a mother whose baby was sick, useless. But the common people's resistance was nothing compared to the fury of the priesthood. Remember, the priests of Amun controlled vast wealth. They owned enormous estates. They commanded political influence across Egypt, and Akhenaten shut them down. He ordered the temples closed. He stopped their funding. He redirected their enormous revenues to Aten's temples instead. Thousands of priests were suddenly unemployed. The complex economic systems built around temple administration, which employed everyone from high priests to cattle herders, collapsed. This wasn't just a religious crisis. This was an economic catastrophe. Entire towns that depended on temple economies were devastated. And then there were the festivals. Egyptian religion wasn't just about temples and priests. It was about public celebrations that marked the rhythm of the year. The Opet festival at Thebes, when Amun's statue would process from Karnak to Luxor Temple. The beautiful festival of the valley, when families visited their ancestors' tombs. These weren't just religious events. They were social, economic, and cultural highlights. Akhenaten cancelled them all. And then, sometime around year 9 or 10 of his reign, Akhenaten went even further. He launched a systematic campaign to erase the old gods from existence. he sent agents throughout Egypt with a specific mission: find every inscription of the word gods, plural, and chisel it out. Find every mention of Amun and erase it. And not just in temples, private tombs, jewelry, everyday objects. If it had the name of a forbidden god, it was to be destroyed. Akhenaten's agents even defaced his own father's monuments. Amenhotep III's name contained Amun. So it had to go. Think about this. Akhenaten ordered the desecration of his own father's memory. In Egyptian culture, honoring your ancestors was sacred. It was one of the most fundamental duties of a son. But Akhenaten's religious vision was more important than even that. The campaign was never fully successful. Egypt was too big, the task too enormous. In remote areas, hidden places, the old names survived. But the intent was clear. Akhenaten wanted to erase 3,000 years of religious tradition and replace it with his own vision. While Akhenaten was focused on his religious revolution, Egypt's empire was collapsing. Remember those Amarna letters we mentioned at the beginning? The ones that led archaeologists to discover Akhenaten in the first place? Many of them are desperate pleas for help from Egyptian vassals who are under attack. To the king, my lord, my sun god. Message of Abdi Haber, your servant. I fall at the feet of the king, my lord, 7 times and 7 times. What have I done to the king, my lord? The lands of the king are being lost. Letter after letter, from princes in Canaan, from governors in Syria, all saying the same thing. We're being attacked. We need help. Send troops. Send support. And Akhenaten did. Nothing. Egyptian power in the Levant crumbled. Cities that had been under Egyptian control for generations fell to local rivals or to the expanding Hittite Empire in the north. Was Akhenaten a pacifist? Did he simply not care about military matters? Or was he so consumed by his religious revolution that foreign policy became irrelevant? We don't know. But the result was clear. By the end of Akhenaten's reign, Egypt's empire was significantly weakened. The priests hated him. The people clung secretly to their old gods. The empire was crumbling. And then there was Nefertiti. This is probably the most famous face from ancient Egypt after King Tut. Nefertiti, whose name means "the beautiful one has come." She was Akhenaten's great royal wife, and unlike many royal women who remain shadowy figures in Egyptian history, Nefertiti was exceptionally visible. Look at how she's depicted in Amarna art. She's not just beside Akhenaten. She's often the same size, implying equal status. She's shown smiting enemies, a pose traditionally reserved for the pharaoh alone. In some temple reliefs, she appears performing rituals by herself, without Akhenaten present. This is unprecedented for a royal woman. Some scholars believe Nefertiti was more than just a queen. She may have been a co-regent, a junior partner in power. One theory even suggests she ruled briefly under a different name after Akhenaten's death. But here's the mystery. Around year 12 or 14 of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti disappears from the record. One moment she's everywhere, in every relief, every inscription, every scene. And then, nothing. What happened to Nefertiti? Theory 1. She died. Simple, But it doesn't explain why there's no tomb, no burial, no mourning inscriptions. Theory 2. She fell from favor. Perhaps she disagreed with Akhenaten's increasingly radical religious policies. Perhaps there was a rift we don't know about. Theory 3. And this is fascinating. She changed her name and continued ruling as Akhenaten's co-regent under the name Nefer-Neferuaten. In the last years of Akhenaten's reign and immediately after his death, there are references to a pharaoh called Ankheperure Nefer-Neferuaten. The name uses female grammatical forms, suggesting a woman on the throne. Could this have been Nefertiti? Some Egyptologists think so. They point to the name Nefer-Neferuaten, which contains Nefer, possibly a reference to Nefertiti's own name. Others disagree, suggesting this mysterious ruler was actually one of Akhenaten's daughters. The truth is, we don't know. Nefertiti, one of the most visible women in Egyptian history, vanished into mystery. But Nefertiti wasn't the only loss the royal family suffered. Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters together. We know their names, see them in countless reliefs, watch them growing up in Amarna's art. But around year 12 or 14 of Akhenaten's reign, the same time Nefertiti disappears, tragedy struck. In the royal tomb at Amarna, there's a scene of profound grief. The royal family is shown mourning, and based on the inscriptions, we know who died. Princess Akhenaten, the second daughter, probably still a teenager. The scene is heartbreaking. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown weeping, their grief captured in a way that's startlingly human for royal Egyptian art. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Evidence suggests that at least 2 more of the daughters died around the same time. What happened? Plague? Childbirth? We don't know for certain, but something devastated the royal family. And here's something even more controversial. There's evidence that at least one of the daughters gave birth to a child whose father was Akhenaten himself. This is one of the darker aspects of Akhenaten's reign. Egyptian royal families had practiced incest before. Sibling marriages were not uncommon among pharaohs. But father-daughter relationships were taboo, even by Egyptian standards. Modern DNA analysis has confirmed that Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's son and successor, was the product of a union between 2 siblings. The royal family was genetically isolated, and this had consequences. By the end of his reign, Akhenaten had lost much of his family. His beautiful capital in the desert must have felt increasingly empty, and Egypt itself was turning against him. Around 1336 BCE, in the 17th year of his reign, Akhenaten died. The circumstances are unknown. There's no record of illness, no description of his death, no official mourning period that we know of. He simply disappears from the record. Was he buried in his tomb at Amarna, as he'd planned? We don't know for certain. The tomb was found in the 1890s, but it had been thoroughly plundered. Smashed sarcophagus fragments, scattered funerary equipment. But here's what's interesting. Some of the fragments show signs of deliberate, ritualistic destruction. This wasn't just tomb robbery. This was desecration. Someone wanted to ensure that Akhenaten's afterlife was destroyed. In 1907, in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes, far from Amarna, archaeologists discovered a badly damaged mummy in tomb KV 55. No inscriptions survive to identify it, but the coffin fragments bore traces of royal names that had been deliberately erased. For over a century, Egyptologists have debated whose mummy this is. DNA analysis suggests it's the father of Tutankhamun, which would make it Akhenaten. But others remain skeptical. Here's what we know for certain. If this is Akhenaten, then at some point his mummy was taken from Amarna, stripped of its proper burial equipment, and reburied in an unmarked tomb. Not the burial of a pharaoh, the burial of a criminal. After Akhenaten died, the throne passed to a young boy, probably only 8 or 9 years old. His birth name was Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. But that wouldn't last long. Within 2 years, the boy king changed his name. Tutankhaten became Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The old god was back. Tutankhamun erected a stela, a large inscribed stone that described Egypt's condition when he took the throne. Now, when His Majesty arose as king, the temples of the gods and goddesses, from Elephantine to the marshes of the Delta, had gone to pieces. Their shrines had fallen into desolation and become ruins overgrown with weeds. Their sanctuaries were as if they had never been, and their halls were a footpath. The gods turned their backs on this land. If anyone prayed to a god, he did not come. If one beseeched a goddess, she did not come at all. Their hearts were hurt in their bodies, so they did damage to what had been made. This is powerful language. Egypt had been abandoned by the gods. The cosmic order, Ma'at, had been shattered. Tutankhamun, or more likely his advisors, given his young age, immediately began reversing Akhenaten's revolution. The temples were reopened. The priests were restored. The festivals resumed. The old gods were honored again. And crucially, the court abandoned Akhenaten, Amarna, the city that was supposed to be Egypt's future forever. Within just a few years of Akhenaten's death, his beautiful capital was empty, a ghost town in the desert. But restoration wasn't enough. Egypt's establishment wanted more than just a return to normalcy. They wanted revenge. Under Tutankhamun's successors, particularly Horemheb, a general who seized the throne, a systematic campaign began to erase Akhenaten from history. At Karnak, Akhenaten's temples were demolished. But they didn't just knock them down. They used the blocks as fill inside new construction, literally burying the heretic's legacy. Tens of thousands of these blocks, called talatat, have been found, used as fill material in later construction. They're like a jigsaw puzzle of Akhenaten's reign, hidden inside the walls of other temples. When later pharaohs compiled official king lists of Egypt's legitimate rulers, Akhenaten was simply omitted. Look at the Abydos king list, commissioned by Seti I and his son Rameses II. It jumps directly from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, as if the entire Amarna period never happened. When later texts had to refer to Akhenaten, they used epithets: the criminal, the rebel, the enemy from Akhenaten. Never his name. To speak his name was to give him power, even in death. And this brings us back to our central question. Why was the erasure so complete? Why was Egypt so determined to forget Akhenaten? Yes, he'd disrupted the economic order. Yes, he'd offended the priesthood. Yes, he'd let the empire weaken. But other pharaohs had done worse. Other rulers had been ineffective or even disastrous. The difference was this. Akhenaten had attacked the fundamental basis of Egyptian civilization itself. Egypt's entire worldview for 3,000 years had been built on Ma'at, cosmic order, balance, tradition. The gods were plural and diverse because the world was complex. The pharaoh was the intermediary between the divine and human realms. Akhenaten tried to replace all of that with a single radical vision. One God, one truth, his truth. And for that, he could never be forgiven. Let's go back to Amarna, Akhenaten's city that was supposed to last forever. It was abandoned within a generation of Akhenaten's death. The population, possibly tens of thousands, simply left. They took what they could carry and returned to the traditional cities. The city wasn't destroyed by war or natural disaster. It was deliberately abandoned as a symbolic rejection of everything Akhenaten stood for. For 3,000 years, it sat in the desert. Sand covered the buildings. The palace crumbled. The great temple fell into ruin. When archaeologists first began excavating in earnest in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they found something remarkable. Because the city was abandoned so completely and never built over, Amarna is the best preserved example of an ancient Egyptian city we have. We know where the bakeries were, where the police station stood, where the workers lived. We've found glass factories, sculptors' workshops, administrative buildings. This is where the famous bust of Nefertiti was found, in a sculptor's workshop, probably left behind in the rush to evacuate. So here's the irony. By trying to erase Akhenaten, Egypt actually preserved him. Because they abandoned Amarna so completely, we know more about daily life in Akhenaten's reign than almost any other period of Egyptian history. The modern rediscovery of Akhenaten reads like a detective story. First came those Amarna letters in 1887. Hundreds of diplomatic tablets that hinted at a forgotten pharaoh. Then came the archaeologists. Flinders Petrie, one of the founders of modern archaeology, excavated at Amarna in the 1890s. John Pendlebury worked there in the 1930s. With each season, more of Akhenaten's story emerged. His unusual art, his radical religion, his royal family. Scholars began to piece together references in later Egyptian texts, the king lists that omitted him, the chronicles that condemned him, the evidence of his systematic erasure. And they realized this wasn't just another pharaoh. This was a revolutionary, a religious radical, a man who had tried to change the fundamental nature of Egyptian civilization. The story fascinated the public. Akhenaten became the subject of countless books, academic studies, documentaries, novels. Thomas Mann wrote about him. Sigmund Freud was obsessed with him. Philip Glass composed an opera about him. Why? Because Akhenaten's story touches something universal. What happens when one person tries to change everything? When they challenge tradition, upset the establishment, and impose their own radical vision on society. For over a century, one question has dominated scholarship about Akhenaten. Was he the first monotheist? Some historians, particularly in the early 20th century, argued yes, absolutely. They saw Akhenaten as a precursor to Hebrew monotheism, possibly even an influence on it. Sigmund Freud went even further. In his controversial book, Moses and Monotheism, he suggested that Moses might have been a follower of Akhenaten, and that Hebrew monotheism was actually derived from Atenism. Modern scholars are much more skeptical. First, Akhenaten didn't truly deny that other gods existed, he just forbade their worship. That's monolatry, or henotheism, not monotheism in the true sense. Second, even Akhenaten couldn't eliminate polytheism entirely. Those hidden amulets at Amarna show that people never fully abandoned the old gods. Third, the chronology is tricky. Hebrew monotheism as we know it developed over centuries, and its roots might be earlier than, contemporary with, or later than Akhenaten, depending on which biblical scholars you ask. So was Akhenaten the first monotheist? Probably not in the strict sense. But he was definitely the first recorded ruler to attempt something like monotheism on a national scale. And he failed. Spectacularly. So what can we learn from Akhenaten's failed revolution? Lesson 1. You can't change everything at once. Akhenaten tried to overturn 3,000 years of tradition in a single generation. He closed temples, fired priests, cancelled festivals, and abandoned cities. It was too much, too fast. The social fabric couldn't handle it. Lesson 2. Economic systems and religious systems are intertwined. When Akhenaten attacked Egyptian religion, he wasn't just challenging beliefs. He was disrupting entire economic systems that millions depended on. Revolution isn't just about ideas. It's about people's livelihoods. Lesson 3. Top-down revolutions rarely work. Akhenaten imposed his vision from above. The people never really accepted it. The moment he died, everything reverted. Lasting change requires buy-in from society, not just royal decrees. Lesson 4. You can try to erase history, but it always comes back. Egypt tried to forget Akhenaten. They chiseled out his name. They demolished his monuments. They omitted him from their king lists. And yet here we are, 3,300 years later, talking about him, studying him, fascinated by him. The Pharaoh who was erased from history became one of the most famous pharaohs of all time. So who was Akhenaten really? Was he a visionary? A man ahead of his time who glimpsed a higher spiritual truth? His great hymn to the Aten is beautiful, a poem praising the sun god as creator and sustainer of all life. It's been compared to Psalm 104 in the Bible. It shows genuine religious feeling. Or was he a tyrant? A religious extremist who destroyed Egypt's heritage and impoverished his people to satisfy his own obsession? He closed temples, fired thousands of priests, persecuted traditional religion, and let Egypt's empire crumble while he built his dream city in the desert. The truth is, probably both. And neither. Akhenaten was human, complex, capable of genuine religious insight and of destructive fanaticism, of love for his family and of egotistical tyranny. He was a man who believed so completely in his vision that he was willing to tear his country apart to achieve it. And when he died, his country tore his memory apart in return. Here's what I find most fascinating about Akhenaten. every society has a version of Ma'at, cosmic order, tradition, the way things have always been done. And every society has people who want to challenge it, change it, overthrow it. Akhenaten reminds us what happens when revolution goes too far, too fast, without bringing people along. But he also reminds us that even the most powerful forces, an establishment that controlled an empire for 3,000 years, can't completely erase someone who dared to think differently. Akhenaten's city is ruins. His temples are demolished. His name was chiseled from history, but we remember him. The heretic Pharaoh who challenged the gods. That's it for this episode of Pharaoh's Legacy. If you found Akhenaten's story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into ancient Egypt's greatest mysteries. Next time, we're looking at another revolutionary pharaoh, but one who succeeded where Akhenaten failed. We're talking about Ramesses II, the great empire builder. How did he manage to change Egypt without being erased from history? Let me know in the comments. Do you think Akhenaten was a visionary or a tyrant? Do you think his revolution could have succeeded if he'd gone about it differently? I read every comment and love hearing your thoughts. See you in the next episode of Pharaoh's Legacy. Remember, history is never truly erased. It's always there, waiting to be rediscovered.